Money. Money is the most powerful force in modern life. It determines whether you eat, where you live, whether you receive medical care, what opportunities are available to you. Wars are fought over it. Lives are destroyed by lack of it. Entire civilizations rise and fall based on their ability to manage it. It seems as fundamental to reality as oxygen or gravity. But money doesn't exist, not physically, not really. Look at a dollar bill. It's paper. The paper itself is worth a fraction of a cent. The ink is worth even less. There's no gold backing it. The United States went off the gold standard in 1971. There's nothing physical that gives the paper value. A dollar bill and a piece of paper from a notebook are made of essentially the same materials. One is worth $1. One is worth nothing. The only difference is collective belief. The dollar bill says, "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private." But that's circular reasoning. It's legal tender because the government says so. The government's authority comes from collective recognition of that authority. The whole system is based on agreement, not physical reality. Digital money is even more obviously fictional. Most money today exists only as numbers in computer databases. When your employer deposits your paycheck, no physical objects move. Numbers change in electronic ledgers. When you buy something with a credit card, electrons move through wires, changing numbers in different databases. The money never physically existed. It's pure information, pure agreement about numerical values. Yet this fictional, non-physical money has absolute power over physical reality. You can be physically evicted from your home, subjected to physical force by armed officers, because you don't have enough numbers in a database. You can physically starve because you lack access to these agreed-upon numerical values. The fiction has consequences more real than most physical objects. Money's value is determined entirely by collective belief. Why is gold valuable? Because people believe it's valuable. Why are dollars valuable? Because people believe they can exchange dollars for goods and services. Why can you exchange dollars for goods? Because other people believe dollars are valuable. It's circular. The whole system is a mass agreement with no foundation except continued belief. Historically, this becomes obvious when collective belief breaks down. During hyperinflation in Weimar Germany in the 1920s, people needed wheelbarrows full of money to buy bread. Children built towers with stacks of worthless bills. The physical money still existed, the same paper bills. But belief in its value collapsed, and suddenly the money was worthless. The paper didn't change. The belief changed. During the 2008 financial crisis, trillions of dollars in value disappeared in days. The stock market lost over $8 trillion in wealth. No physical objects were destroyed, no resources vanished, but numbers and databases changed, and suddenly wealth that had existed was gone, because it never physically existed. It existed only as collective belief. Cryptocurrency makes this even more explicit. Bitcoin has no physical existence whatsoever. It's not even numbers in a traditional database. It's entries in a distributed ledger maintained by computers around the world. Yet people treat it as real money. And it has real purchasing power, purely because enough people believe it does. At its peak in 2021, Bitcoin's total market value exceeded $1 trillion. $1 trillion worth of value in something that has no physical form and exists purely as agreement. If everyone simultaneously stopped believing in money tomorrow, it would instantly cease to exist. The paper would still be paper. The gold would still be gold. But nothing would be money anymore because money only exists as a shared agreement. Countries and borders. Look at a map of the world. You see lines dividing the planet into countries, different colors for different nations, clear borders. It looks solid, objective, real. Now, look at the actual Earth from space. No lines, no borders, no countries. Just land, water, and clouds. The divisions exist only in human minds and on human-made maps. Stand at the border between two countries. On one side, you're in country A. Take one step across an invisible line. Now, you're in country B. Different laws apply to you, different rights, different government claims authority over you. Different currency is official. Your legal status changes completely. But the ground beneath your feet is the same. The soil is identical. The air is the same. Only the collective belief about which side of an imaginary line you're standing on has changed. Countries are legal fictions that exist only because people believe in them and enforce that belief with violence. There's no physical property that makes land American or French or Chinese. The dirt doesn't know what country it's in. Only humans have decided that arbitrary lines divide different jurisdictions. These divisions have enormous real consequences. Cross a border without permission, and armed people will forcibly send you back, possibly imprison you, possibly shoot you. Borders determine whether you can seek employment, receive health care, vote, own property. Your physical location relative to imaginary lines determines fundamental aspects of your life. The arbitrariness becomes obvious when you examine how borders were created. Many were drawn by colonial powers with rulers on maps. The border between the United States and Canada, west of the Great Lakes, is the 49th parallel, a line of latitude. It's completely arbitrary. Someone decided that latitude line would be the border, and now it determines citizenship and legal systems for millions of people. Many African borders were drawn at the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885, where European nations literally sat in Berlin and drew lines on maps dividing Africa among themselves. These lines cut through ethnic groups and traditional territories. Those arbitrary lines drawn in a conference room became permanent international borders that persist today, 140 years later. Countries appear and disappear based purely on collective belief. The Soviet Union existed from 1922 to 1991. For 69 years, it was a real country, one of the world's superpowers. Then belief in its legitimacy collapsed. In 1991, it ceased to exist. The land didn't disappear, the people didn't vanish, but the country stopped existing because people stopped believing in Soviet authority. It dissolved into 15 separate countries based entirely on new agreements. Yugoslavia existed from 1918 to 1992. Then it fragmented into 7 separate countries based on ethnic and religious divisions. The land remained. The people remained. But the country ceased to exist because collective belief in Yugoslav identity broke down. Countries can't exist without territory. During World War II, several governments in exile operated from London, while Nazis controlled their territories. The countries existed as pure agreements between governments, with no physical territory. The Sovereign Military Order of Malta has been recognized as a sovereign nation by over 100 countries, despite controlling no territory except 2 buildings in Rome. It's a country based purely on international recognition, collective belief with no physical basis whatsoever. If everyone simultaneously stopped believing in countries tomorrow, they would cease to exist. The land would still be there, the people would still be there, but there would be no nations, no borders, no citizenships, only humans living on Earth. Corporations. Corporations are among the most powerful entities on Earth. They control vast resources, employ millions of people, influence governments, and shape economies. Apple, Amazon, ExxonMobil, Walmart. These corporations have more wealth and power than most countries. But corporations don't physically exist. They're not made of atoms. You can't point to a corporation and touch it. A corporation is a legal fiction, a set of agreements and documents that we collectively treat as if it were a person. This becomes obvious when you try to locate a corporation physically. Where is Apple Inc.? You might say Cupertino, California, where their headquarters is. But that's just a building with employees working in it. The building isn't Apple. The employees aren't Apple. They can all be replaced, and Apple continues existing. Apple is a legal entity that exists only on paper and in collective recognition. Legally, corporations are persons in many jurisdictions. They can own property, sign contracts, sue and be sued, and in some cases have constitutional rights like free speech. But they're not physical persons. They're fictions we collectively agree to treat as persons because it's convenient for organizing economic activity. The practical effect of this fiction is limited liability. If a corporation causes harm, environmental damage, defective products, worker injuries, the corporation can be sued, but the owners and shareholders generally can't lose more than their investment. This is entirely a legal creation. In physical reality, actual human beings made decisions that caused harm. But we've collectively agreed to treat the corporation as a separate entity that bears responsibility instead of the humans who actually made the decisions. Before limited liability corporations became common in the 19th century, business partnerships meant partners were personally liable for all debts and obligations. If the business failed, creditors could seize partners' personal assets. This made large-scale investment risky. The concept of the limited liability corporation was invented to encourage investment. We collectively agreed to create legal fictions that would shield investors from personal liability. This fiction has become so accepted that we forget it's a fiction. We talk about corporations as if they're real entities. Apple released a new iPhone. Amazon delivered my package. But Apple and Amazon aren't entities that can act. People working at companies called Apple and Amazon acted. We use the corporate fiction as linguistic shorthand, and eventually forget that it's shorthand. The fiction can persist even when physical reality changes completely. A corporation can continue to exist while replacing 100% of its employees, selling all its physical assets, changing its business completely, and moving to a different country. The corporation persists as a legal identity while everything physical about it changes. What continues is the agreement. Corporations can own other corporations in complex nested hierarchies. A holding company might own nothing but shares in other corporations, which themselves own shares in other corporations. You end up with corporate structures several layers deep, where each layer is a legal fiction owning shares in other legal fictions. It's agreements all the way down. If everyone simultaneously stopped believing in corporations tomorrow, they would cease to exist. The buildings, equipment, and products would still exist. The employees would still exist. But there would be no corporations. Only people and physical resources, with no legal fictions organizing them. Stock market value. In 1999, Pets.com had a market capitalization of $300 million during its IPO despite never making a profit. The company lost money on every sale. In 2000, less than a year after going public, it went bankrupt. Yet, at its peak, investors collectively believed it was worth $300 million. Stock market value is the clearest example of value created purely by collective belief. A stock's price is whatever people will pay for it. That's circular. People will pay a certain price because they believe other people will pay that price or higher later. The value exists entirely in expectations and beliefs about future beliefs. A company's stock market capitalization can be multiples of its actual revenue or assets. Tesla's market cap in 2021 exceeded the combined market cap of the next 9 largest automakers, despite Tesla producing a fraction of their vehicles. Why? Because investors believed Tesla would be worth more in the future. The belief created present value disconnected from present physical reality. During the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s, companies with minimal revenue and no profits had billion-dollar valuations purely because investors believed internet companies would dominate the future. When belief collapsed in 2000-2001, trillions in market value evaporated. No physical assets were destroyed. No revenue disappeared. Only belief changed. The 2008 financial crisis showed this even more dramatically. Mortgage-backed securities were treated as valuable assets by major financial institutions. Then belief in their value collapsed. The mortgages still existed. The houses were still there. But the securities became toxic assets worth fractions of their previous valuation because collective belief disintegrated. Stock prices can change dramatically based on news, rumors, or statements, with no change in physical reality. Elon Musk tweeting Tesla stock price is too high IMO in May 2020 caused Tesla's stock to drop 10%, erasing $14 billion in market value. Nothing about Tesla's business changed. A tweet changed perception, and perception is reality in stock markets. GameStop's stock rose from $20 to $480 in January 2021, based purely on retail investors buying shares. The company's fundamentals didn't change. Its business prospects didn't improve. The price rose purely because people decided to buy it, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. When buying stopped, the price collapsed. The entire cycle was collective belief, creating and destroying value with no connection to physical reality. Market analysts try to calculate fundamental value based on earnings and assets, but stock prices regularly deviate from fundamental value for extended periods. Price is determined by collective belief, and collective belief can persist in states disconnected from any fundamental reality. Entire market indices can lose trillions in value during crashes, then regain that value during recoveries. Where did the trillions go during the crash? Nowhere. They never existed physically. Where did they come from during recovery? Nowhere. They were created by renewed belief. If everyone simultaneously stopped believing in stock market value tomorrow, all stocks would be worthless. The companies would still exist. The assets and operations would still exist. But the market value would evaporate because it's pure collective belief. Laws determine what you can and can't do. Break a law, and armed agents of the state will forcibly restrain you, imprison you, fine you, or in some jurisdictions, kill you. Laws have absolute power backed by violence. They seem as solid and real as gravity, but laws don't physically exist. They're not made of atoms. They're agreements, collective decisions about rules and consequences. They exist only because enough people with power believe in them and enforce them through violence. The arbitrary nature becomes obvious when you compare laws across jurisdictions. Cannabis is legal for recreational use in Canada and many U.S. states. In Singapore, possessing even small amounts can result in death penalty. In the Netherlands, it's decriminalized. The plant is identical. The chemistry is identical. Only the collective agreement about legality differs. You can legally drink alcohol at age 18 in most countries. In the United States, you must wait until 21. Nothing changes physiologically between 18 and 21. The age restriction is completely arbitrary, a collective decision that could have been any age. Yet, violating this arbitrary rule can result in fines and criminal records. Speed limits are pure collective agreement. 65 miles per hour is arbitrary. It could be 60 or 70. Yet driving 66 in a 65 zone can result in fines backed by state violence. The difference between legal and illegal is 1 mile per hour, an arbitrary line. Laws change constantly, proving they're not discovering truths, but creating temporary agreements. Homosexuality was illegal throughout the United States until 2003. Then it wasn't. The physical reality didn't change. The collective agreement changed. Same-sex marriage was illegal until 2015. Then it became constitutionally protected. The collective legal agreement shifted. The ultimate demonstration of law's dependence on collective belief is what happens when enforcement breaks down. During riots or natural disasters, when police can't enforce laws, looting often occurs openly. The laws still technically exist, but without enforcement backed by collective recognition of authority, laws are just words. Legal systems vary wildly across cultures. Some societies practice common law based on precedents. Others use civil law based on comprehensive codes. Others use religious law based on scripture. These different systems have incompatible foundations, but all function within their societies. There's no objectively correct legal system, only different collective agreements. Constitutions are fascinating examples. The U.S. Constitution is treated as foundational law, but it's a document written by people in 1787, amended 27 times since. It has authority only because Americans collectively agree it has authority. If tomorrow Americans collectively decided the Constitution no longer had authority, it would just be a historical document. If everyone simultaneously stopped believing in laws tomorrow, they would cease to exist as functioning rules. The words would still be in law books, but they would have no power because power comes from collective recognition of authority and collective willingness to enforce. Language and meaning. The word tree refers to a tall plant with a trunk and branches, but there's no inherent connection between the sound tree and the plant. English speakers decided that particular sound would mean that particular thing. Spanish speakers use arbol. Japanese speakers use mu. French speakers say arbre. The plant is the same. The sounds are completely different. The connection is pure collective agreement. All language is collectively agreed upon fiction. Sounds have no inherent meaning. Marks on paper have no inherent meaning. Meaning exists only because communities agree that specific sounds or symbols will represent specific concepts. It's entirely arbitrary and entirely powerful. You can go to prison for saying certain words in certain contexts: threats, incitement, perjury. The sounds themselves are just vibrating air. But we've collectively agreed that certain sounds in certain situations will result in state violence against you. The sounds have power not because of physics, but because of collective agreement. Different languages divide reality differently, proving categories are constructed rather than discovered. Russian has separate words for light blue, goluboy, and dark blue, siny, that aren't shades of the same color, but completely different colors, like red and orange are different in English. English treats all blues as variations of one color. The electromagnetic spectrum is identical. The collective agreement about categorization differs. The Himba people of Namibia have different color categories than English speakers. They easily distinguish shades of green that English speakers see as identical, while struggling to distinguish green and blue. The physics of light is identical everywhere. The collective agreement about meaningful categories differs based on language. Time concepts vary across languages. English has complex tense systems marking when events occurred. Some languages have minimal tense marking. The physical experience of time hasn't changed. The linguistic encoding differs based on collective linguistic agreements. Money values are often expressed in language that masks their constructedness. We say a car is worth $30,000, using language that implies inherent value rather than collective agreement about exchange value. The language makes fiction seem like physical reality. Legal language creates realities through performative speech acts. A judge says, "I now pronounce you married," and two people are legally married, a status that didn't exist moments before. The words performed the reality. Speech acts make explicit that language doesn't just describe reality, but creates social realities. Meanings change over time as collective agreements shift. Gay meant happy, then became slang for homosexual. Awful originally meant inspiring awe. It shifted to mean terrible. Nice originally meant ignorant in the 1300s. Now it means pleasant. These changes prove the connection between sound and meaning is arbitrary collective agreement. If everyone simultaneously stopped believing in language tomorrow, stopped agreeing that sounds had shared meanings, language would cease to exist. People could still make sounds. But those sounds wouldn't mean anything because meaning exists only as collective agreement. Days of the week in calendar systems. Today is Saturday, December 27th, 2025. But why? What makes it Saturday? What makes it December? What makes it 2025? The physical reality is that Earth is rotating on its axis and orbiting the Sun. The rotation creates day-night cycles. But the planet doesn't know it's Saturday. The solar system doesn't recognize December. Dividing time into named 7-day weeks and numbered years is pure collective human invention. The 7-day week has ancient origins, but it's completely arbitrary. The week could have been 5 days, 8 days, 10 days. There's no natural 7-day cycle in astronomy. The ancient Romans used an 8-day week. The Maya used a 13-day sacred cycle. Revolutionary France tried a 10-day week. The 7-day week won through cultural dominance, not physical necessity. The names of weekdays reveal the constructed nature. Wednesday is named after the Norse god Odin. Thursday is Thor's day. Saturday is Saturn's day. These reference ancient gods most people don't worship, yet we use these names daily without thinking about their origins. Different cultures number weeks differently. Much of the world considers Monday the first day of the week. The United States treats Sunday as the first day. The physical 7-day cycle hasn't changed. The collective agreement about numbering differs. The calendar itself is collectively agreed upon fiction. Today is December 27th, 2025, according to the Gregorian calendar. According to the Islamic calendar, today is Jumada, 2/26/1447. According to the Hebrew calendar, it's Tevet 26/507-86. Same moment in Earth's orbit, different collective agreements about how to name it. The year 2025 counts from an estimated birth year of Jesus Christ, a reference point chosen by a 6th century monk and adopted through Western cultural dominance. The numbering is arbitrary. We could be in year 12,025, Human Era Calendar, or year 2778 from Rome's founding. The year 2025 has meaning only because we collectively agree to count from that particular estimated date. Month lengths are arbitrary and irregular. Why does February have 28 days while others have 30 or 31? The original Roman calendar had 10 months. January and February were added later. The current system is a historical accident codified through collective adoption. Different cultures celebrated New Year's on different dates historically. England's New Year started in late March until 1752, when it changed to January 1st. The timing of the New Year is pure convention with no physical basis. The weekend being Saturday and Sunday is completely constructed. These as days off work is a relatively recent industrial era invention. Some countries have different weekend days. Many Middle Eastern countries observe Friday-Saturday. The physical rotation producing days is the same everywhere. The collective agreement about which days are work versus rest differs. If everyone simultaneously stopped believing in calendar systems tomorrow, dates would become meaningless. Earth would still orbit the sun. The planet would still rotate. But there would be no December 27th, no Saturday, no 2025. Only celestial mechanics without the names and numbers we've imposed. Credit scores. Your credit score is a 3-digit number that determines whether you can rent an apartment, buy a car, get a mortgage, sometimes even get a job. It's treated as an objective measure of your financial responsibility. But credit scores are entirely constructed metrics that exist only because financial institutions collectively agree they exist and matter. There's no physical reality corresponding to a credit score. It's a made-up number based on collectively agreed-upon formulas. Different credit scoring models produce different scores for the same person. FICO scores range from 300 to 850. Vantage score also ranges from 300 to 850, but calculates differently. Someone might have a FICO score of 720 and a Vantage score of 690. Which is their real score? Neither. Both. There are different formulas producing different numbers. The factors used to calculate credit scores are arbitrary decisions. Payment history is typically 35% of your FICO score. Why 35%? Why not 30% or 40%? Because the formula designers decided 35% was appropriate. Credit utilization typically accounts for 30% of your score. Why? Because someone decided it should be. The categories and weights are conventions, not natural laws. More bizarrely, financially responsible behaviors can hurt your score. Paying off loans early can drop your score because you have less credit history. Never borrowing money can hurt your score because you have no payment history. The score doesn't measure financial responsibility objectively. It measures behaviors that lenders decided correlate with profitable borrowers. Credit scores didn't exist in their current form until 1989 when Fair Isaac Corporation introduced the FICO score. Before that, credit decisions were more subjective. After 1989, the existence of the score changed behavior. People began optimizing for this made-up number, rather than simply managing finances sensibly. The system is circular. Credit scores exist because lenders believe they predict default risk. Lenders use scores for decisions. This creates data showing correlation, but correlation is partly self-fulfilling. People with low scores get worse loan terms, making default more likely, which validates the score. Different countries have completely different credit systems, or no centralized credit scoring at all. The United States has highly developed credit scoring, affecting many aspects of life. Many European countries don't use credit scores the same way. Some countries have centralized credit reporting. These societies function fine with different systems. If everyone simultaneously stopped believing in credit scores tomorrow, they would cease to matter. The numbers would still be calculable, but they wouldn't determine access to financial products, housing, or employment, because the system exists only through collective institutional agreement. Intellectual property. Copyright, patents, and trademarks are forms of intellectual property. Legal ownership of ideas, expressions, and inventions. You can own a story, a song, an invention, a brand name. This seems natural in modern society, but ownership of intangible ideas is pure collective fiction. Physical property is grounded in rivalry. If I have an apple and you take it, I no longer have it. We can't both possess the same physical apple. But ideas aren't rivalrous. If I tell you an idea, we both have it. My possession doesn't exclude yours. Infinite people can possess the same idea simultaneously. Intellectual property creates artificial scarcity where none exists naturally. Copyright law says that even though infinite people could read the same story at essentially zero cost, only people who pay the copyright holder should be allowed. This scarcity exists only because we collectively enforce it through legal systems. The arbitrary nature becomes obvious examining IP law history. Copyright in the United States originally lasted 14 years with one possible renewal, 28 years maximum. Now, it's life of the author plus 70 years. Why? Because copyright holders lobbied to extend terms. The Copyright Term Extension Act of 1998, nicknamed the Mickey Mouse Protection Act, extended terms just before Mickey Mouse would have entered public domain. The same work that would have entered public domain in 28 years in 1790 now remains under private control for over a century, based purely on change collective agreement. Nothing about the creative work changed. The legal protection term changed. Different countries have different copyright terms. Mexico protects works for life plus 100 years. Canada is life plus 50 years. A creative work can be in public domain in one country while still copyrighted in another, based entirely on different collective legal agreements. Patent law is even more arbitrary. You can patent an invention but not a law of nature or mathematical formula. Einstein couldn't patent EMC2, but someone could patent a specific application of that principle. Where exactly is the line between unpatentable natural law and patentable invention? Wherever courts collectively decide, it is. Fair use in copyright is explicitly a balancing test. Courts weigh factors to determine if a use is fair. This is collective negotiation about boundaries, not discovery of natural limits. Different courts can reach different conclusions about identical uses. Digital technology made IP's constructed nature obvious. Copying digital files is effortless and perfect. The natural state of digital information is infinite replicability at near zero cost. IP law fights against this, trying to impose artificial scarcity on infinitely copyable information. If everyone simultaneously stopped believing in intellectual property tomorrow, it would cease to exist. The ideas, expressions, and inventions would still exist, but there would be no legal ownership of them. Only physical ownership of specific instantiations and contractual agreements. Ownership of intangible ideas exists only because we collectively recognize and enforce it. Social classes. Your upper class, middle class, or working class. These categories seem to describe real divisions in society based on wealth, occupation, and power. But social classes don't physically exist. They are collectively agreed upon groupings imposed on continuous gradients of wealth and status. The boundaries are arbitrary. The categories change across cultures and time. Classes exist because we believe they exist and organize society around that belief. The dividing lines between classes are completely unclear. What income makes someone middle class versus working class? Pew Research defines middle class as households earning 67–200% of median income. But this is arbitrary. Why not 65–205% or 70–190%? The boundaries are collective decisions based on statistical conventions. Moreover, class isn't just income. Education, occupation, cultural capital, family background, and self-identification all factor in. Someone earning $40,000 as a teacher might identify as middle class. Someone earning $40,000 as a plumber might identify as working class. Identical income. Different class identification based on cultural factors. Different countries have completely different class systems. Britain has complex class structure, including upper class, upper middle class, middle class, lower middle class, skilled working class, and working class, with distinctions based partly on accent and family background. India has the caste system. These aren't measuring the same reality differently. They're imposing different organizational schemas. The number of classes is arbitrary. Marxist analysis uses two, bourgeoisie, and proletariat, based on relationship to means of production. American discourse often uses 3. Sociologists sometimes use 5 or 6. There's no objectively correct number because classes aren't natural categories. Class mobility proves classes are socially constructed. People move between classes through education, marriage, entrepreneurship. If classes were natural categories based on inherent characteristics, mobility wouldn't be possible. But people do move between classes, demonstrating that class is social position that can change. The performance aspect of class is revealing. Upper-class people perform upper-classness through clothing, speech, consumption patterns, and cultural knowledge. These performances are learned behaviors. Adopt the right behaviors convincingly, and you can pass as a different class. This works because class is collective recognition of social position, not inherent biology. Historically, explicit class systems like feudal estates made the constructed nature obvious. People were legally categorized with different rights. Modern classes seem more natural because they're not legally enforced, but they're still collective agreements about social organization. If everyone simultaneously stopped believing in social classes tomorrow, they would cease to exist. Wealth inequality would still exist. Differences in education and lifestyle would remain, but there would be no classes. No collectively recognized categories dividing society into hierarchical groups. 10 things that exist only because everyone believes they exist. Money, countries, corporations, stock value, laws, language, calendars, credit scores, intellectual property, and social classes. These things are extraordinarily powerful. Money determines whether you eat or starve. Borders determine whether you're arrested for crossing invisible lines. Corporations control vast resources. Stock markets move trillions based on shifting beliefs. Laws backed by violence control behavior. Language enables all communication. Calendars organize all social coordination. Credit scores determine access to housing. Intellectual property restricts use of ideas. Social classes structure life opportunities. Yet none of them physically exist. They're not made of atoms. They're collective agreements, shared fictions that became real through belief and enforcement. Money works because everyone accepts it. Countries exist because armed people enforce borders. Corporations function because courts treat them as legal entities. Stock prices move on collective belief. Laws have effect because police enforce them. Language communicates because speakers share meanings. Calendars coordinate because everyone uses the same reference. Credit scores matter because lenders use them. Intellectual property exists because legal systems enforce ownership. Classes structure society because people recognize boundaries. These aren't easy to change. The agreements are enforced by institutions, habits, infrastructure, and interests. Money is backed by governments. Countries are defended by militaries. Corporations are embedded in legal systems. Stock markets have institutional infrastructure. Laws are enforced by police. Language is learned in childhood. Calendars are built into coordination systems. Credit scores are used by every major lender. Intellectual property is protected by treaties. Classes are reproduced through inheritance. But they're ultimately contingent. They could be different. They have been different historically. They vary across cultures. They persist only because collective belief persists. If collective belief in these systems broke down simultaneously, modern civilization would collapse. If money became worthless, economies would fail. If countries dissolved, coordination would shatter. If corporations ceased to exist, economic organization would fragment. If stock markets crashed to zero, capital allocation would freeze. If laws lost authority, order would collapse. If language meanings drifted, communication would fail. If calendar systems diverged, coordination would become impossible. If credit systems collapsed, lending would freeze. If intellectual property disappeared, innovation incentives would transform. If class dissolved, social organization would need reconstruction. We're completely dependent on shared fictions. Modern life is built on collective agreements, mass hallucinations given power through universal acceptance. The most solid-seeming structures of society exist only in collective imagination, maintained by continued belief and enforcement. If everyone stopped believing tomorrow, the physical world would remain. Mountains, rivers, and forests would be unaffected. But the social world, the world of money, nations, corporations, laws, meaning, time, credit, property, and status, would vanish instantly. Because it never physically existed. It exists only because we believe it exists. The things that control your life most completely are collective illusions. That makes them no less real in their effects. But it reveals that reality itself is partly constructed. We live in a world where belief creates existence, where enough shared faith in a fiction makes it true, where collective hallucination shapes civilization as powerfully as physics. 10 things that exist only because everyone believes they exist. 10 proofs that the most powerful forces in human life are agreed upon illusions that persist only because we continue believing in them.